Welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody who was at the workshops have had really exciting workshops, and those of us who were just coming back from a break between the opening keynote and now for the closing plenary, welcome back. I hope everybody has had a chance to take a break, grab something to drink, and everybody's fully awake and focused and ready for more. So for our plenary session this morning, I think we're still in the morning. Yes, we're still in the morning. We have Professor Stephen Hall, who really needs no introduction, but as today's MC, it's part of my JD. So here we go. Stephen J. Hall is the head for the Center of English Language Studies here at Sunway University, where he has worked for 13 years. His doctorate on teacher education analyzes early phases interaction during rural Malaysian in-service courses. He was an Inservice Teacher Training nationwide project manager in Malaysia for 4 years and has served on the Ministry of Education Malaysia advisory committees for TESOL, pedagogy standards, as well as curriculum development. In the late 90s, Professor Hall was a corporate trainer with his own business in Singapore, and his clients included, among others, Changi Airport, Singapore Airlines, Visa Asia Pacific, and HBO Asia. Prior to that, he managed the language and communication at Temasek Polytechnic in Singapore. Stephen has trained teachers for the ASEAN-wide RELC, along with Dr. George Jacobs, our keynote speaker this morning, and has taught at tertiary, secondary, and primary levels. He has authored English for Tourism textbooks presented in over 15 countries and has over 50 publications. He enjoys percussion and wine writing for some balance. Professor Hall's latest book, co-authored with his wife, Lee Soo Kim, is Manglish, Malaysian English at its wackiest. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to pass you on now to our plenary speaker, Professor Stephen J. Hall.
Thank you very much, Nick, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being part of our ESAP symposium, the first E-based symposium. What I would like to do in the next half an hour is go with you on a little journey through a rite of passage. And by a rite of passage, I mean the fact that none of us have been able to avoid the pushed change that has come with COVID-19. At the same time, I would like to address some of the things to do with the sustainability of these changes. I'd like to start, first of all, by saying, whether we like it or not, I think we all may have gone through a rite of passage, so to speak. And by that, I mean that there are thoughts that you may have had during COVID-19 that are not exactly the most positive, and we've had to deal with lots. So I'd like to share an experience that was myself looking at sustainability, myself looking at push change, and compare it to some of the things that you may have gone through along with me in COVID-19. I'm going to start with a little poem, and you'll notice it's just my talking head. So, of course, this is one of the first differences, because later on I will employ visuals because they are so important in what we're doing now. A poem, Cyclonic Thoughts During COVID Corral Day 66. It's day 66, and the devil did not do it. Movement control order, now conditional with a long, long list. But crashing in on me are memories of court, crashing no exit walls of windows, water and wind. Comfort level nil and remembered casualties, not zoomed on screens of comfort couch wallowing. In 1986, Solomon Islands housebound, house, and driving rain, slopes, slits, ships and streets. My mind was a screen of screaming aerial tin sheets. Coconut trees crashed. Homes a flat plain of nothing. You feel them? walls of corrugated water in front, behind, all around, hemmed in the house, No water but too much mud, no power, nothing, stop-blow house. The swollen enemy river was a bathing friend in the aftermath. And now, in the clear aircon cocoon in our tropical 2020 Malaysia, it's Vision 2020 of plastic cocooned blue death. Here then, suddenly there, spiky unknown 2020. Now, in this poem, I ask us to consider that we are in a rite of passage and that things can change. And I'd like to now move to a PowerPoint where I consider the fact that we need to line up what has happened in COVID-19 with where we're going to go. So if I could go to the slides now, that would be good. Okay, so this was my previous rite of passage in '86 in Solomon Islands, where the fundamentals of not going out of the house were made even more challenging for me because there was no electricity and there was no water. Okay. So, in Solomon Islands then, we had change which was pushed upon us. I have a little bit of problem getting my slides into action here. Just excuse me for a minute. Okay, so pushed change, rather dramatic push changed, just like we're experiencing with COVID-19. And it is making many of us be involved with work that may be very challenging, like my friend Dr. Bachan Singh. So we are being run through speed like a gauntlet. We are going through our own rite of passage. And this philosopher, Sean Penn, makes the point. He says, I'm not going to recommend recklessness, but somewhere just short of it, testing yourself and pursuing a rite of passage has become necessary because we're comforted and we're often addicted to comfort. And you know that we have faced some learning and the world is going to be different for these students and different from this kind of world where, of course, you see no social distancing. So these kind of changes, even when you're moving towards different kinds of technology, are really something that is quite challenging for many. So this kind of reality is still a way away. This is the intensive English program with our international and local students. And really what's happening is a whole lot of other technologies. And we've talked today about Kahoot, TikTok, Quizlet, and so on. So this really is something where we need to consider pushed output in the challenges online and offline. As we've gone through a rite of passage, we need to consider some things that are happening online and offline that are the same. These are the need to build rapport, our role as an interpreter of different texts, and the importance of engagement. Obviously, we have to change the way we do some things. I don't really think this is the way to go, of course, because we are now involved in the importance of non-verbals. And in these non-verbals, as you see here, where I'm talking to this brilliant 10-year-old who developed a multimedia app to do with sugar, we have to consider what's happening with the non-verbals. Here we see a couple of very powerful cavemen. So the main thing that we need to consider is, both in the classroom and outside, what are we doing with the eyes? Because the eyes are so important in engaging people. And often we ignore the fact that the level of the eyes is really important, especially when you're online. And that when people are public speaking online, it's different from a large audience and dividing it into the thirds, because the screen is not the camera is somewhere else. So these are some new skills for us to consider. The use of lights, of angles, of backgrounds, and you and your slides. Now, I know that when we teach, we often use gesture. But online, this can become a blur. However, perhaps a measure when we're teaching both on and offline of using gesture to enforce keywords is important. Too much, though, you look like the Karate Kid. So consider about what happens in getting close to people, given the importance of non-verbals. What do you do when you're teaching with the role of gesture? And are you moving away from teacher up front, that power circle, to creating interactivity? In this webinar, it's really much teacher up front, but of course we can't do much of that as we get ready ourselves to go online by doing some of these warm-up activities. Each is obviously important, and I would argue that one of the lessons for going online is the importance of almost exaggerating what happens in speech. Because you need to compensate for the fact that they can't see all of your non-verbals. So think about how you stress words, time, emphasize, and pace. So rapport through the speech, through the non-verbals, and developing the listening. Remembering that in all of this, how people pay attention is really to do with what we ask them to do, especially in listening. Okay, now I'd like to move to the I of rite of passage. We have a role as interpreters of the experience as we select, structure, and space what is going on. I also think that we are interpreting more than just words, that we also need to consider what is happening with visuals critically, as we've heard today. So perhaps we need to broaden the concept of literacy to consider visual literacy. We need to chunk our listening and think of scaffolding the output, because it is true that visuals are very supportive of language learning. We are also in the business of spacing significant repetition. As phone apps show with their popularity, spacing significant repetition is important. And online, I think one of the biggest challenges I've had is signaling when we're moving to interactive tasks, the things such as we've seen using Kahoot, Padlet, and so on. So, rapport, our role is interpreting, and we are interpreting varying texts. In front of you is a text. There's Latin as well, but this text is loaded with images trying to suggest an ancient time, if you like, for our relatively modern university. Look at the use of the knight's helmet and so on. and of course the sons. So a text increasingly involves visual literacy and a critical visual literacy. So we shouldn't just have text like this, which you've just heard, because we can do so much more to support it. Yeah. And if we were to just have heard text, it can be very difficult as well. I think this is especially true given that many of our learners are Instagram, TikTok fans. They're WhatsApp people. So we do need to consider varieties of texts and supplementing them with visuals. For example, visuals have been a literacy for centuries. Here's heaven and hell from the wall of a monastery in northern Romania, which I was fortunate enough to visit 2 years ago. Now, for many of our learners, and I hope our textbook producers wake up, yeah, it's scene text that was happening more and more because people are searching and looking before reading. They look for the colors in the top right hand of the screen, as reading is occurring differently from print texts. So for me, part of the rite of passage for me has been learning a bit more about being on the screen, a bit more when I teach about including visuals rather than just the use of the print. Because it's the web and social media that are pushing this change now. So one of the rites of passage for me is discovering an enormous number of really good apps that enhance language learning, and they don't all need super high-speed network. So where are our education factories? Are we still stuck in the inkwell and the quill world? Because whether we like it or not, the students will vote with their feet and with their action. And we need to be critical though. So you may recall this incident involving a Catholic high school American young man and a Native American activist, and how it became viral and it totally misrepresented the situation. So I'd like to pick up on what some of our other speakers have talked about today in the workshops, that critical literacy, looking beyond the surface in text and visuals, is important. Mylan, so me. So we are a WhatsApp country, left, right, and center. But are we developing in our learners a sense of what is happening online? Yeah, are we giving them the vocab to analyze and consider what's happening? And remember that whatever you do, that text determines attention, but task even more so. So I know I've got to finish soon, but if I said to you, here's a text, list all the words starting with C, you will look at the text differently from if I say to you, find 3 images to match this text from my rite of passage. And increasingly, we need to involve our learners through things like Padlet and Kahoot in interacting with text and being engaged. We can engage them through these kind of tools, get them to reproduce a different form of literacy, like infographics. Get them to post their views, as I heard in my workshop some of you are doing. Involve them interactively. Get them to create videos, because we find this useful when we're looking at assessing speaking. And get them to power up their phones and flip the classroom around with co-constructed text. Teach them how to search with Google Grammar so they synthesize and are involved in shared projects. Now, if you want some theoretical reading on this, there's a brilliant article, absolutely brilliant, ha 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 ha, because I wrote it, da da dum, but you can find this online where I talk about the need to be engaged, because teaching is not the transmission of knowledge, as Socrates said. Have a quick read. All about questions. There is no right answer, as we've been through our rite of passage. It's important to look at rapport, to look at how we interpret texts and how we engage. So reward the key aspects and think about challenging with ideas. Without the ideas, they won't be able to write the essay in SPM. And think about our power status being questioned as we are facilitators that toggle the different modes, multimodal learning, and stress the significant things and stretch the students out because they know a lot. We can learn from our students. We can learn like this Duolingo hour. We can learn from how they design phone apps that are free like this. So, the biggest challenge for me, you've got to raise questions from the dead. Think of interactivity by using your intonation, sometimes over the top a bit. And remember, turn taking is really important. Also, in the class and online, wait time is important. People need the space to think. And if you think this push change is going away, it's not. Go and see what's happening online with internetlivestats.com. See that this push change is happening and we do need to be sustainable. We have no choice. It might not be a cyclone, it might not be a primitive rite of passage, but these are Solomon Islanders and a male rite of passage. You go in one end going through these guys and come out the other. You go into cyclones and you come out the end changed. We go through COVID-19 and we come out changed. But we have little choice but to think of what is sustainable and to keep what we've learned from the push change. So keep learning on your phone. Keep building rapport, for you are the interpreters of this pushed output. We have many texts to explore and new ways to engage our learners so that their rite of passage through our online facilitation is a meaningful one. I'd like to quote from one of my favorite authors, and it's a book you've probably heard about. Now is no time to think of what you do not have. Think of what you can do with what there is. Ernest Hemingway. Now, there is no right answer, just more questions for us and the learners to answer together as we're developing a questioning and aware approach and reflect on our learning from COVID-19 so that we build something sustainable. And what I'd now like to do is to turn it over to questions from anybody. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all of my colleagues for making this event possible and for you from coming from everywhere. We've even got people from Colombia, Australia, Nepal, Pakistan, Japan, India, Indonesia. This is great. And we hope that you have benefited, but please, I'd like you now to do something that I also think is very, very important. Questions, please.
Thank you, Professor Hall, for that. It was really inspiring and lots to think about. There have been some questions in the chat, and maybe we can just start with this. question of how do we use offline materials in an online environment? Because I think for many of us, the bulk of the materials that we have are offline.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first one is try and put them online. An app such as Genius Scan that is on your phone will create an image that you can pop into a PowerPoint. Yeah. That's the first one. That's a kind of obvious answer. But if you're asking about using things like, I see there's a participant asking teaching, listening, speaking skills from printed matter. Let me come to that. I think the question is, if the students are sharing the same textbook, if they have it, then you talk about whatever they have, if that's the case. The other way is I really think you can explore free and cheap, quite easy ways of converting the printed text. So if you want to use part of it, it's a very cheap way. You take the textbook and you put a piece of paper on the top and the bottom if you want the middle, and you scan it, put it on your phone, and then away you go. You can easily get that online. That would be one of my answers to it. Yes, it becomes tricky, but the question is, can everybody share the input, whether it's full printed input or online input? If they can share the input, then it's the tasks that you do that become important. I've got one here, Nick. How do we teach listening and speaking using printed modules? This is very difficult. This is a bit like saying, I would like to teach you swimming. Could you go for a run in the park? You know, the main thing about learning a skill is you have to do it. So if you're not producing spoken output, that becomes very, very, very tricky. I don't have any real answer. And if you've got the printed modules, it's a question of how are you going to provide them with the chance for pushed output, for productive use of the language. If you want them to speak, they have to have a chance to speak. There's no way around that. If you want them to listen, then you need to chunk the printed materials and try and provide some visual support if you can for the listeners.
Sure, thank you for that. Those are really good suggestions. We've got another question here about younger learners, and a lot of times younger learners would prefer face-to-face, in-person instruction, and it's a challenge being online. What would you recommend for that?
Well, you know, many of you may not know that I was a primary school teacher for 6 years. So one of the biggest things, I suppose, with younger learners, they have very short attention spans, right? You know, if you go for about 7 minutes, after that, they want to do something else. I really think we're back on something which all the picture book producers will tell you, the role of images. Yeah. So using pictures, weaving a lot of pictures in is very important. And then it's just the same as when you're in the class. If you're dealing with these, you know, 7 and 8 year olds, they run all around the place if you let them. You know, it's kind of like they've got a rabbit in each pocket. I think the thing is that you've really got to set the ground rules for turn taking online and the signaling for turn taking. But that's the same as you would do in a classroom, right? I set the ground rules for when I talk in a classroom, physical classroom, I move to the same set spot and say, when I come here and you hear me go, you clap back, right? So online, I need to also signal very clearly when I'm talking and when it's your turn, and make the turn allocation very clear for young learners, and use lots of images, lots of pictures. It's visuals. Yeah, because, you know, we semantic network up here in our brain, and we're linking pictures with the sounds and with the words. So that's what I'd say with young learners. But I actually think the most challenging teaching is kindergarten. We got it wrong. We should pay the kindergarten teachers more and university professors, except me, less.
I'm not sure how anyone will agree with you on the payment,
No,
but for
but it's
sure
the
we need
most
to pay.
important stage of education. You've got to
It
get
is,
them before puberty.
definitely.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's locked in and hard to unlearn as you get older, for sure.
Yes. Oh, yes, I know that. But there's lots to learn for all of us as teachers. If we stop learning, we might as well get another job. So we've been pushed into learning through this change. So I think we can embrace some of the lessons, yeah, and go through the inner rite of passage and think, how am I going to be changed at the end of all this?
Great. We've got a question here from Carol in the Philippines. I'm just going to read it out. In the Philippines, printed modules are to be distributed among students. Do you agree that this will be an effective and good means of educating the students? What about the possibility of transmitting the disease through this? What's your take on this? Thank you.
I heard the disease part at the end of it. Was that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, okay. We had a discussion in our Sunway University Library Committee about that the other day. And they said that actually, with books and paper, you really should leave them out in the sun for 4 hours. So that's the one about the disease. So last week, I learned about that. So that's that one. The printed materials. Well, texts and materials are only as good as what you do with them. So you can have the most incredibly boring stuff, but an effective educator will try and pull out a variety of different tasks to do with it. So if they've got the printed materials in the Philippines, because I know sometimes too, connectivity can be a challenge in all those different islands, then it's a question of what you can do to get them to do different tasks. So I think going back to all the old stuff about multiple intelligences, there are different ways we should provide for students to react to the printed materials. For example, could they convert them to an infographic such as Canva? Because I heard last year at Malta, our Malaysian conference, about a primary school teacher who was doing infographics to teach basic programming with Form 1 kids. So getting them to approach the printed materials in different ways with different responses is important. Okay, I've got another one I see, Nick. Okay, here's a classic which we get all the time, Nick, which is diverse English proficiency. Yep. Yeah, I've been in ELT for 40 years, and I think I've heard this question every year. And I ask myself at every class. I have never seen a class where everybody has the same level of English proficiency, and that includes at the master's level. So there's always diverse differences. I was involved a few years ago in producing a textbook for Malaysian district education officers, where we basically said, here is the core task, here are 3 ways of simplifying, and here are 3 ways of extending. So whenever I have one task, I always think about how can I simplify this? And what do I do with the bright sparks that always finish early? Because they become the pain in the neck in the class by normally giving you a problem. You know, that they're the ones that are problematic because they're bored. And so they want to play anarchist. Yeah. So I think the key lies in whenever you've got a task, saying to yourself first, how do I simplify it? And in the old days of blackboard and chalk, remember that? I would actually have a wizard's corner. I would actually have written up at the beginning of the lesson, here is the extension task. So when they come to me and go, sir, I've finished already, I'm bored. Up there, try that. Yeah. Or can you go and help so-and-so? In other words, peer learning. Yeah,
Yep.
get them involved with working with the rest of the class. You can simplify through task, simplify through the text itself, simplify it by chunking it in different ways. Yeah, so you can simplify task, what they do, or simplify the text. They're the two basic things. Yeah, and then if they're super bright and they're willing, there's nothing like a bit of peer tutoring, because it also helps them learn the concepts more thoroughly.
Sure.
Do you need me to say that in a simpler way?
And I think with online learning, we actually also have some added advantages in some ways, that you can prepare materials ahead of time and have them ready to be distributed in whatever platform that you have used or you're using. And I think gamification is another excellent way to help with this, because you can create levels within each task, and learners will know, okay, if I'm done with level 1, there is a level 2. And then there becomes, some level of, or some sense of competition.
Yes, I think you've got 2 points there. One is gamification, because people like whatever you say about cooperative learning, it's very important, but people also like a bit of the competitive side of things. So we've heard during this session about the uses of Padlet and Kahoot and Socrative. These interactive things are quite important. And I mean, games are a good way of getting some motivation. Then the other thing you mentioned, the flipped classroom, which we've had some colleagues talk about today too. So if the material is there before you're going to discuss it, you can actually ask those who are willing to do the extra work to come to the class with the questions that they have from having seen the material beforehand. So that flipped classroom thing, I think, is one of the great advantages of online learning, and something that I think we should really look at sustaining at this time of push change.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice segue to another question that we got here, from Wayan Ika Budiarta, about the need to look into getting students to be confident. So the question is, what can we do to encourage them, students, and to enable them to be familiar with this new learning method being online?
Oke, terima kasih banyak Wayan. Ini pertanyaan itu yang istimewa ya. It's a very important question, a very special question. I think providing a sense as a facilitator of learning that you accept all kinds of contributions and answers, and that when you are online, it is a safe zone where mistakes are not a problem. We learn by mistakes. So I would actually be explicit and say, if it's a speaking and listening activity, that I'm interested in what you say, and we can tackle the how you say it later. So in other words, the development of a sense of safety to explore the language and to get it wrong sometimes. This is how I learn my other languages. I make mistakes. And then to signal later, okay, now let us look at some of the accuracy issues that we could deal with here, coming out of what has happened. But it's very important to be positive, to be affirmative, to look at some of the principles that I know George Jacobs talks about here, showing gratitude to the learners for their contribution, a sense of safety. Now, I've got a big question here, Nick, I see on the chat. Some courses that can be included in language curriculum. Okay. I think what is lacking at present in the language curriculum, there's a lot, that's a very big question from Bangladesh. There are a lot of courses, but I do think using what is online and understanding it critically and using online things safely is important. Secondly, I think actually using searching online to teach levels of specificity What is a general statement? What is specific? So you can use online searching to teach vocabulary. Okay, we start with color, then we go to red, then we go to vermilion, and so on. So I think that the idea that we can be developing vocabulary is important. There are a lot of free apps, so you really want to look at those as well. So in terms of your language curriculum, use a variety of sources online and offline. And I think that will enrich it and make it more relevant to the students. It's a big question you've asked me. I hope I've narrowed it down a little. What I'll do is on our CELS Facebook, I will include for all of these participants, if you go to our CELS Facebook on Monday, a list of websites that contain free resources, esllistening.com, for example, and hopefully you'll find those useful. So if you check on Monday, check the CELS Facebook page. I have culled out about 30 different websites that are free resources. So perhaps they may be useful to you, whether you're in Bangladesh, Indonesia, or Sabah and Sarawak. Okay, Nick, that's it from me, I think, but anything else you would like to say?
No, and I think that's a really nice way that we can end. Thank you so much for answering all the questions. Thank you again for the sharing. I think those were really useful points. And yeah, we are moving on to the closing session for today. So we just wanted to extend a big thank you to all the different speakers that we've had today. For example, Dr. George Jacobs, our keynote, Professor Stephen Hall that we've just heard, Ms. Farhana Ashani, Joseph Pang from Sunway JB, Kenny Ong, Dr. Melissa Maria, Mira Dawan, Persis Rodriguez, Dr. Tamashkis, the latest addition to the ESAP team, and Mr. Timothy Wong, all the way from Monash University. Thank you so much for contributing. Thank you so much for sharing. I really hope that everybody who has joined us today has learned something and is going back with more questions. So we'd like to also encourage and invite everybody here to join us on Facebook. As Professor Hall has mentioned, he's going to be sharing some resources. Please do follow us on the CELS webpage, and that's the screenshot of what it looks like, Center for English Language Studies, Sunway University. If you search for that on Facebook, you will find us. Do give us a like and a follow. The recordings from today's sessions, I believe, will also be shared on Facebook. And I know that a lot of participants have asked for slides, and yeah, those will be shared to everybody as well. So please, do be patient as we compile the recordings as well as the resources, but we will be sharing that with you in due time. And in addition to the Facebook page, what would really help us, what we would really appreciate is if you could help us fill up a feedback form. If you've enjoyed today's session, please let us know. If there are shortcomings and ways we can improve, please let us know. That's really helpful. We always aim to be better the next time round. And yeah, there will be a next time round. We hope to be able to see everybody face to face and online, perhaps next year. So do drop us a note in the feedback form. If you can't scan the QR code with your mobile phone, you can type into your browser bit.ly/ESAP20 feedback, and that will take you to the form. And I hope somebody will put that link in the chat so that you can pick that up as well. Thank you very much again for joining us today. We've come to the end of the ESAP 12th Symposium in the year 2020, first time virtual, first time online, and first time, I believe, international with so many people. I just wanted to do a shout out to a couple of more people who have joined us from Macau and from Laos and from Taiwan. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your presence. We appreciate your participation. And most of all, we just want to say terima kasih and see you again soon. Bye.
Bye now.
For over 30 years, Sunway College has propelled more than 60,000 students towards the university of their choice, offering Malaysia's leading pre-university programs, A-Level, OSMAT, CIMP, MAFI, Sunway Foundation Program, also featuring the award-winning professional accountancy institution Sunway TESOL, Diploma Studies, and Malaysia's only Victoria University accredited business program. One college, a world of choices. Sunway College, pathway to a brighter future.
At Sunway University, we have traveled the world seeking out the finest educational opportunities, allowing you to experience a world-class education closer to home. Featuring international collaborations with Cambridge, Harvard, Oxford and the University of California, Berkeley, alongside partnerships with the award-winning Lancaster University UK, Le Cordon Bleu, Paris, Alibaba Business School and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. At Sunway University, the opportunity is yours. Sunway University, truly a class above.